We're in the book of beginnings, lesson 29. And since we're in the book of beginnings, I want to start with 1 Peter. 1 Peter 5:6 says, "Humble yourselves therefore under the mighty hand of God, so that he may exalt you at the proper time, casting all your care on him because he cares about you." And the reason I share that particular scripture is, if you remember, we started talking about Joseph back in the 37th chapter of Genesis, and he had a couple of dreams, and in his dreams he told his brothers about his dreams and about how they were going to bow down to him and that type of thing. Instead of waiting for God to promote him, it's almost like he was promoting himself, and he was just sharing his dreams, but it's not a good idea to do that. But we need to be careful how we do that. If we let our promotions come from God and not from us, it works a lot better. Because it's therefore under the mighty hand of God, so that he may exalt you at the proper time. And there's times when at the time that he had those dreams, he was not prepared for what he would do that we're going to be talking about tonight. It was a whole different story. So we're in Genesis 41, starting with verse 1. 2 years later, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing beside the Nile when 7 healthy-looking, well-fed cows came up from the Nile and began to graze among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows, sickly and thin, came up from the Nile and stood beside those cows along the bank of the Nile. The sickly, thin cows ate the healthy, well-fed cows. Then the Pharaoh woke up. I guess so. He fell asleep and dreamed a second time. 7 heads of grain, plump and ripe, came up on one stalk. After them, 7 heads of grain, thin and scorched by the east wind, sprouted up. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 plump, ripe ones. Then Pharaoh woke up, and it was only a dream. So to get us started tonight, is there a significance in the number 2? And I put down some of the things here. Joseph had 2 dreams. The cupbearer and the baker had dreamed the same night. So that's 2 dreams. 2 years later is when it's what's happening here, what Pharaoh is talking about. And Pharaoh had 2 dreams. So is there a significance in 2? There's a lot of people that get into numerology and different things, and they get so carried away with the numbers, what the numbers mean in the Bible, and so on, that they forget to read the Scripture and see what the Scripture says. But sometimes numbers do have meaning and can have significance. In this particular case, I put, did the number 2 have significance to the ancient Egyptians? And the answer to that is, as I'll be told, significance and so on. And this is a quote: "The ancient Egyptians had a unique approach to numbers, particularly evident, years ago. There was a book, it was written and said in the Hebrew manuscripts that you can follow down, and you go across this way and it spells Hitler, and this one spells this and this, and you can find all these hidden codes and things in these books. So I was scanning through the book and reading it, and it said about you could predict the future from these codes and things that are in the manuscripts. Well, what I ran into with the book, I didn't know what he was talking about. He was good. He was real good at predicting the past. What he was not good at was predicting the future. He didn't predict a single future event with this great code that he had found. And I was wondering, what good is your code if it can't tell you something other than what you already know that you've already read that's in history? And that happens a lot of times with numbers. I know in school you've had multiple choice tests and true false tests, and some teachers they'll make it where it's repeating, so that if you figure out their code, then you can pass the test. Because sometimes people spend so much time trying to figure out the code and figure out if it meant anything. They never finished the test, so they failed the test anyway. So it didn't matter. So the point is, regardless of whether it means anything or not, if it means something to the Egyptians, would God use the two of different things to mean something to them? And it could be possibly yes, because he's trying to get through to a bunch of heathen people. Anyway, the ancient Egyptians had a unique approach to numbers, particularly evident in their numbering system based on base 10. However, what set them apart was their attribute system associated with specific numbers. For example, the number 2 symbolized duality, the balance between male and female, order and chaos. So number 2 was a special number to them, and it had special significance to the Egyptians at this particular time. Is that the reason God gave him 2 dreams? I don't know. He might have given him 2 dreams, and Joseph will say something about this in just a couple of minutes. So in verse 8, when morning came, he was troubled, so he summoned all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. Pharaoh told them his dream, but no one could interpret them for him. So nobody could interpret his dream for him. It didn't say they tried or they gave it a shot or they said, well, maybe it means this. It didn't say if they answered him at all. This is at least better than Nebuchadnezzar in the book of Daniel when he called his wise men and soothsayers all in there, and he said, I've had a dream. I need you to interpret my dream. And they said, okay, well, tell us what your dream is. He said, you don't understand. I've forgotten what the dream is. You've got to tell me what the dream is, and then you got to tell me what it means. And they said, well, we can't do that. He said, that's fine. I'll kill all of you. And they said, oh. And that's when Daniel got word of it. He said, I think we'll give it a shot. So that's not exactly what it's written in King James, but that's kind of what happened. These magicians, magic was a part of everyday life with the ancient Egyptians. They believed in all different kinds of gods. They had many gods that they worshipped, and there's some of them for fertility, some for the sun setting, some for the moon. They had all kinds of different gods that they worshiped. But they believed in the dark powers were everywhere, and they could be combated through magic and rituals. So they had certain ceremonies and things that they would do. Of course, back then the Pharaoh was a god himself, considered themselves as a god. That's not a very big god. Anyway, the one here, Heka, was the god of magic, the personification of magic itself. He is often overlooked among the vast list of ancient Egyptian deities because he was so universal in his presence. In other words, they all knew of him. You've probably heard of some of the name, like the name Ra is a big name that's known in the ancient Egyptian gods, but they believed in many gods. So, natural versus supernatural. You look at supernatural, if it's used as an adjective, attributed to some force beyond scientific understanding or the laws of nature. As a noun, the supernatural, manifestations of events considered to be of supernatural origins, such as ghosts. Do we believe in the supernatural? Well, yeah, if you believe in God, you believe in angels, and you believe in demons, that's supernatural. That's outside of the natural. Angels are not of the natural world. They're of the spiritual realm, so they're of different realms. So there is a supernatural. The problem is that, well, they have gotten to the point where they started creating more and more gods. They had to have a god for this, they had to have a god for that. And so man started out, Adam and Eve, they knew there was one God. They spent time with that one God. Then when they fell, as time went on, they got further and further and further away. And then they got to where they started creating more and more and more and more gods. And then as we get out into our 19th century, late 19th century, and 20th century, 21st century, scientists and so on say that we don't need the supernatural, we don't need God anymore because we understand all this stuff now and we can improve everything scientifically, which is not true. They can't. So they got to the point where they said there is no God. So they went from one God to a bunch of gods to no God, and we believe there is a God. But we're dealing with Egyptians, and that's where Joseph is at this time. And I put, why is man prone to look to the occult? And to me, my answer to that is because there's things we don't understand. And that's like they released a bunch of the papers from the Kennedy assassination. How many conspiracy theories have you heard over the years about how many people there was that killed Kennedy, and if it was Oswald, and they say it wasn't Oswald, it was somebody else. They say it was Oswald, but there was two other people there, and there was one behind the grassy knoll. There was this one that did it, that CIA killed Kennedy. Lyndon Johnson had Kennedy killed. The mafia had Kennedy killed. Fidel Castro had Kennedy killed. And one thing I can tell you for sure, it wasn't all of them. But because people didn't know, what do they do? Your imagination starts going, and you want to explain things. It's hard for human beings to grasp the fact that somebody as great as the President of the United States could be killed by one man. So it makes us feel better if we can say it was a conspiracy, grand conspiracy, because if the President of the United States is that fragile, where does that leave me? And so people are prone to turn to the occult and try to find answers to things that there's not answers to that we can answer here. So I had put man was created in the image of God. Man lost that connection with the spiritual. No longer having the mind of God, man became further removed from God and his wisdom. Man began to try to explain the unexplainable. Man discovered natural ways to explain the mysteries of life. Man decided that everything could be explained naturally. So we went throughout the history of mankind, we've gone through many different phases. And when it's very simple, if you said, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, it makes things a lot easier. But whether it does or not, and one of my favorite scriptures when it comes to this is Romans 1:22, and King James says, professing to be wise, they became fools. Here it says, claiming to be wise, they became fools. Everything is supernatural, everything is natural. There is natural and supernatural. And I think the last one is appropriate. They're both supernatural and natural. Anything outside of the natural realm would be supernatural. It would be things that we can't explain. When morning came, and repeat this again, he was troubled, so he summoned the magicians of Egypt and all his wise men. Pharaoh told them his dream, but no one could interpret them for him. And I said, did they offer an interpretation? It doesn't tell us. They might have told him, well, it could have been this, or it could have been this, or it might be this, but whatever it was, they didn't come up with a good answer. Verse 9. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, all of a sudden he remembers, said to Pharaoh, today I remember my faults. Slip down to the 11th verse, it says, he and I had dreams talking about the baker, had dreams on the same night. Each dream had its own meaning. Now a young Hebrew, a slave of the captain of the guards, he interpreted our dreams for us, and each had its own interpretation. It turned out just the way he interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position, and the other man was hanged. So he's saying, now remember what Joseph told the cupbearer? He said, I've given you all this good news. You're going to be set free. He said, how about remember me when you get out? And the cupbearer forgot all about him. Forgot all about him. And I mentioned this last week. It could have been that he was a little nervous about mentioning anything to Pharaoh. I mean, he had been thrown in prison and the baker was executed, so it'll make you a little nervous. Verse 14, then Pharaoh sent for Joseph and they quickly brought him from the dungeon. He shaved, changed his clothes, and went to Pharaoh. Pharaoh was desperate. He had turned to anybody to get his answer at this point. And it says here, he said he shaved, changed his clothes, and went to Pharaoh. Now, you've seen pictures of the way the ancient Egyptians looked and the way they dressed and the way their hairstyles were and the way the ancient Hebrews, the children of Israel, the way they looked. They were different, much different. Well, Robert Alter says this. He said, in the ancient Near East, only the Egyptians were clean shaven. And the verb used here can equally refer to shaving the head or close cropping it, another distinction Egyptians practiced. So, if Joseph was going to, if he was going to be presented to Pharaoh, my thinking is it changed his clothes, cleaned him up, shaved him, so you make him look more Egyptian if you're going to take him in before the Pharaoh. You're going to make him presentable. Now, how long it took to do all this, I don't have any idea. But anyway, they brought him, he had to be patient because they brought him before the Pharaoh for him to be the one that talked to him. Verse 15. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream and no one can interpret it. Or I had a dream, but I have heard it said about you that you can hear a dream and interpret it. I am not able to, Joseph said. I am not able to. Joseph answered Pharaoh, it is God who will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. I like the last part of his answer there too. He said first, he said, I'm not able. He said, it is God who will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. That's a pretty big statement of faith, isn't it? So if God's going to give you an interpretation of this, that's either God had already told Joseph something or he's a pretty gutsy fellow. What was the interpretation of the two dreams? What was it? You can have 7 years of good and plenty, and it's going to be, your crop is going to produce great for 7 years, but then you're going to have 7 years of famine. So, then Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dreams mean the same thing. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years. The 7 ripe heads are 7 years. The dreams mean the same thing. The 7 thin, ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 worthless, scorched heads of grain are 7 years of famine. There will be 7 years of abundance, 7 years of famine. And then he said in this, notice what he said. Since the dream was given twice to Pharaoh, it means that the matter had been determined by God and he will carry it out soon. So he brings up the concept about, this is just Randy's thinking. My thinking is God gave Pharaoh 2 dreams because he knew it was significant that things came in pairs, came in twos, and Joseph knows that from living in Egypt, this period of time that he has lived. He's been there since he was 17 to what he's been now, 30, something like that. He's been there a while. And so he said he gave you the dream twice because this is what he's going to do. Now, here is the interesting part. What did Pharaoh ask him to do? Ask him to interpret a dream. Did he ask him for advice? He just asked him to interpret the dream. I want to know what this dream means. Now here's Joseph. So now let Pharaoh look for I like this. So now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. You think he's talking about himself?
Is this the same Pharaoh that sent him to the dungeon?
Yes. Well, Potiphar is the one that sent him to the dungeon, but it was the same Pharaoh at the time. But he said, let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this. Let him appoint overseers over the land and take a fifth of the harvest of the land of Egypt. So now he's gone from interpreting a dream to saying you need to pick somebody that's wise that can do this, and this is the way you need to handle this. So he's telling him how to do it. Let him appoint overseers over the land and take a fifth of the harvest of the land of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. Let him gather all the excess food during these good years that are coming. Under Pharaoh's authority, store the grain in the cities so they may preserve it as food. The food will be a reserve for the land during the 7 years of famine that will take place in the land of Egypt. Then the country will not be wiped out by famine. And I put a question here that I've already, did Pharaoh ask for Joseph's advice? We don't have it recorded where he did, but Joseph gave him some advice. His advice was pretty good. And he said take a percentage of it each year, the good years, and put aside so you'll have food for the famine. So God, where does this fit into God's plan for the children of Israel? Because there was a famine in the land of Canaan where they were too. Without food that's stored up, they would, the covenant people under the Abrahamic covenant would pass away with everybody else. They'd starve to death with everybody else in the area. And at this particular time, they were just a small group of people in the land of Canaan. They weren't powerful enough yet to be able to take over this land and make it the promised land like God had promised. And there was all kinds of people there. So here was God preparing for his people, taking them into a foreign land, which is what wound up happening, into a foreign land, and kept them, provided for them, took care of them for 400 years. It's a long time. Verse 37. The proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. Then Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find anyone like this, a man who has God's Spirit in him? Notice what Pharaoh said. He said, God's Spirit. This, well, I'll get that in a second. Has God's Spirit in him. So here's Pharaoh talking about God. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one as intelligent and as wise as you are. The name that, where you see God here, where Pharaoh's using the name God, it's Elohim, is where it is the Hebrew word that it comes from. And you can see that it can mean God, the creator of everything. It can mean, well, in the definition here it says, it can be a supreme God, occasionally applied in a way of deference to magistrates, sometimes a superlative for angels, for God, and so on, and judges. And in other words, it can mean different things. This meaning of God is a plural meaning, Elohim. It's the first name in the Bible when it said in the beginning God. It's the name Elohim is that they use. And some people say, because it's a plural name, they say, well, that means there's more than one God. But you remember what God said. He said, let us make man in our own image after our own likeness. So there's a plural nature to God in the fact that he is over everything. Like we've talked about before, when people ask me, could there be another planet somewhere, another universe somewhere with people living on it like there is here? It could be. I don't have any idea. And then people have asked me the question, well, why doesn't it say anything about it in the Bible? And I said, because the Bible was not written to people on Mars or into some other universe. It was written to the people in heaven, on earth. So that's who the Bible was written for. So it wouldn't be talking about people in different. Can you imagine if there are different universes that God created and different planets and different beings on them? If he'd have had them to write a book about all of them. How many libraries do you think you'd have? I'm not saying there are others, but I'm saying there could be. There's nothing to say there's not. Genesis 41-45. Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zephanath-Paneah. I'm glad I don't have that name. And gave him a wife. He gave him a name and gave him a wife. the daughter of Potiphar, the priest at On. And Joseph went through the land of Egypt. So, if you look up that name, it could mean different things. In the Targum, which is a commentary on the Torah, it says, it's interpreted as the man to whom mysteries are revealed. Joseph translated it, the revealer. Josephus translated it as the revealer of secrets. Josephus is a first century historian. And it says 2 sons were born to Joseph. Here we go again with 2. 2 sons were born to Joseph before the years of the famine arrived. Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore them to him. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, meaning God has made me forget all my hardship in my father's house. Think about that. His first son was born, and he names him something that has meaning. It has made me forget. And the second son he named Ephraim, meaning God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. So here is, of course, the overall arching moral to this story, if you want to use it for our own life, is if you do things God's way, He blesses you and He redeems us and delivers us even when we don't see any way for it to be done. So Joseph became the second only to Pharaoh, and we'll continue for there the next time. Are there any questions?